Hi, my name is Jacob, and today I'll be presenting our work on measuring DNS cookies. So to start, the domain name system, or DNS, is of course a key aspect of the internet used to convert domain names to IP addresses. And in our typical architecture, we'll start with a stub resolver, such as a laptop, which will ask a recursive resolver a query. And that recursive resolver will then ask a series of authoritative servers. So one thing to note here is that this creates two separate client and server pairs. And in most queries and responses are using UDP for transport. So UDP is fast, but it's also connectionless. And because UDP is connectionless, there's no mechanism to verify identity. So this creates two different attacks. In the first attack, known as cache poisoning, the attacker spoofs a response from a server pretending to be authoritative. So this results in the victim receiving a potentially malicious IP address as an answer. With denial of service attacks, the attacker spoofs queries appearing to be from the victim. They'll send these fake queries to thousands of servers, causing the victim to be overwhelmed with responses. In both of these cases, the attacker is off path, meaning they're not seeing a direct communication between the victim and server. So DNS cookies are one solution for providing identity management, and they exist as an option in the extended DNS or eDNS opt record. So these are standardized as an RFC in 2016. And essentially how it works is that a client will include a unique cookie in its query. And when a server responds, they will include that same client cookie as well as a server cookie that they have generated. So what this essentially does is that both parties can then verify the other by ensuring their own cookie is included when the other sends a message to them. And since our attacker is off path, they have no way of seeing these cookie values. So the first thing we wanted to do was to see how many clients and servers out there are using cookies right now. So to start, we're going to look at authoritative servers, and I have a little map in the bottom right for all the rest of these slides because we'll be jumping around to DNS a lot, so that can help you keep track. So for authoritative servers, we had our client query the servers for all of the TLDs, as well as all of the top 1 million Alexa sites. And what we found is that nearly every server supports eDNS, which, as I mentioned, eDNS support is required because cookies are an eDNS option. But then we saw that less than 30% of servers fully supported cookies. And by that, we mean that they responded with our client cookie as well as the server cookie that they had generated. Next, we looked at the server side of recursive resolvers. So to get our set of recursive resolvers, we sent queries to every IP in the IPv4 address space. And we're essentially checking if they behaved like resolvers. So was the recursion available flag set? Was the error code no error? Things like that. And we identified almost 2 million servers. Of those, 70% supported eDNS and 17% supported cookies. So a fair bit less than what we saw with authoritative servers. Finally, we wanted to look at recursive clients. So for those 2 million servers in the previous slide, our client queried them for a domain name that we controlled. So this caused them to query our authoritative servers, and we could then see if they included a cookie. So for this data set, we had under 100,000 servers. And at the time of this test, 1.5 million resolvers were still active. So this seems to imply that there's probably a large amount of forwarding going on to this smaller subset of true recursive resolvers. Regardless, what we found is that 9% sent us a query with a client cookie in it. So now we've seen how many clients and servers are using cookies. And next we want to ask, well, how many people are enforcing cookies? And what we mean by that is anyone actually gaining that identity management aspect of cookies by rejecting messages in certain scenarios? So we'll first look at our recursive clients, which we had around 29,000 of. And what we'll do is we'll begin by having them query our authoritative servers normally to establish that we support cookies, right? So they'll query us with a client cookie, we respond with a client cookie as well as a server cookie, just like normal. After that, we would customize our server's response to elicit different behaviors from the client. What we found is that around 85% of clients behave normally when our server stopped including eDNS or stopped including cookies. However, only 20% would accept if we sent a incorrect client cookie. Only 20% would accept our message. So what this means is that more than 80% of clients that use cookies are still susceptible to that cache poisoning attack that I mentioned at the beginning, right? So the attacker can just send a spoofed response and clients will accept it, regardless of whether there's a cookie or not. And to make matters worse, the RFC specifically states that they must discard these queries since they should be expecting our response to contain a cookie. So not only is this an unsafe practice, but it's also violating the RFC. So similarly, we looked at enforcement in recursive and authoritative servers. And here what we did is we queried the servers with our client, and we either included a real server cookie that we had previously obtained from them, and then we wouldn't include a cookie, and then we would include an incorrect cookie. And so the specification gives servers 3 different options for how to behave. They're ordered here from most to least restrictive. And what we found is that more than 99% of servers implement the least restrictive approach, which is just to respond normally. So what this means is that pretty much every server, regardless of whether they're using cookies or not, can still be used for a denial of service attack, because the attacker can just send a normal query spoofing the victim, and the server will go ahead and respond to that victim. So we've seen that very few clients and servers are enforcing cookies. So finally, we wanted to think of some ways that this could be improved. So for client enforcement, which is used to prevent cache poisoning, it's pretty straightforward. For the most part, clients should follow the RFC and enforce cases where they should be expecting cookies. Of course, server configurations could change, but there should be some reasonable expectation as a server that is using cookies will continue to do so. It's also not as big of a deal for clients because there's other methods such as 0x20 encoding and source port randomization, which are effective in preventing cache poisoning. So cookies aren't the only solution in this space. On the server side, it's difficult to determine if a client intends to support cookies, right? Just because a client sends a cookie once doesn't mean they always will, and vice versa. And a great example of this is a NATed network where one client behind a NAT could send a cookie while none of the other clients are. So one solution that we suggest is that clients could advertise their intent to use cookies in a reverse DNS zone using text records. Servers could then check for these advertisements and enforce what they see. In summary, the DNS is vulnerable to identity management attacks, such as cache poisoning and denial of service. DNS cookies are a standardized mechanism to mitigate these attacks. So we were the first people to measure adoption of DNS cookies, and we found that around 30% of servers and 10% of recursive clients were using them. However, we found that very few clients or servers were actually enforcing cookies, and as a result, those identity management attacks still exist, even for those who have adopted cookies. And our proposed solution, which we leave to future work, is a mechanism for clients to advertise their use of cookies. Thank you.